Okay, let's unpack this. We have source material detailing a really shocking and brutal string of crimes that rocked the isolated Swedish countryside back in 1990.
That's right. And we're dropping you straight into the deep end of a very complex investigation. It's led by Inspector Kurt Wallander in Gästad, which is a pretty quiet town in the southern region of Skåne.
And our mission for this deep dive is to meticulously track how a single devastating crime, well, it doesn't just stay a local issue, it metastasizes, really, into a national political crisis.
It's a masterclass in criminal complexity and context. I mean,
Yeah.
we're not just following clues here. We're watching a formerly, let's say, insulated society come face to face with global tensions and some really ugly internal hatreds.
So we're tracking how one seemingly simple rural robbery just spirals completely out of control.
Exactly. It uncovers these deep-seated family secrets, it tests police ethics right to the breaking point, and it reflects the very human cost of fear and political anxiety in a society that, up until then, had been remarkably calm.
And this all unfolds over a really intense 8-month period, from early January all the way to August of 1990.
It does. And it all starts with this chilling catalyst in a tiny place called Limop, deep in the Skåne countryside.
The date is January 7th, 1990, and the time is 4:45 in the morning. A farmer, a man named Nystrom, he wakes up. But the reason he wakes up is what's so compelling. It's because of a lack of sound.
Right. It's the silence that's wrong.
Yes, the horse mare in the stable wasn't neighing in her stall. And you have to imagine, in the deep quiet of a Swedish winter, that tiny, unsettling absence. It's the first tremor before a national earthquake.
So Nystrom, he gets up to investigate this unnerving silence. He walks across the yard to the house that belongs to his neighbors, the Lövgrens.
At first, he just notices that the kitchen window is open, which he knows has a habit of sticking, so maybe it's nothing.
But his wife, Hanna, she looks closer, and she delivers the line that really chills Wallander later on. She says, "The kitchen window isn't open, it's smashed."
And from there, it just escalates so fast. Nystrom calls the Gästad police at 5:13 a.m. His report is frantic, you know. The man, Johannes Lövgren, is dead. And the woman, Maria, is tied up, but she's still breathing.
When Wallander arrives, you immediately get the gravity of the case. He reflects on it later in his career, and the source material is clear. He called it the worst he had ever seen.
Let's really emphasize the brutality here, because it's the core mystery from the very beginning. Johannes Lövgren wasn't just murdered. The doctor's report notes this almost unbelievable level of sustained violence.
I mean, we're talking about injuries that were, and this is a quote, sufficient to kill him 4 or 5 times over. It's pure overkill.
So Wallander sees this, and he realizes instantly this wasn't the work of, a professional thief looking for a quick score.
Exactly. This level of violence suggests a rage that just far, far exceeds the requirements of a simple robbery. It speaks to viciousness or intense hatred or maybe even revenge.
And if Johannes' death was that horrifying, the treatment of his wife, Maria Lövgren, was. I mean, it was equally, if not more, shocking.
Absolutely. She was found half lying on the floor, tied to a chair. The ropes were digging so deep into her wrists they'd broken the skin. But the most significant detail, the one that defines the entire case, was the knot.
A noose, rigged tightly around her frail, scrawny neck.
A noose. And the sheer cruelty of that setup is crucial. Wallander and his colleague Peters, they immediately note that whoever did this exhibited an insane degree of malice.
You have to ask, why the noose? I mean, if the intent was just to silence her, a gag or a simple binding would have been enough, right?
Of course. The noose is symbolic. It's a threat and a form of psychological torture, even if she wasn't actually hanged with it. This detail screams that there's a personal element here, yet the crime scene itself, the smashed window, it suggests unknown intruders.
And that's the central conflict right from the start.
Yes, that collision between apparent revenge and apparent random brutality is what fractures Wallander for the beginning. He's trying to reconcile the act of a professional killer with the rage of a complete maniac, and he feels entirely unprepared for this new level of chaos.
That initial sense of being overwhelmed, it leads us directly into Wallander's own state of mind. The sources really stress that Wallander felt ill-equipped to deal with chaos this winter.
And it's not just because it's a difficult case. His personal life is completely collapsing at the same time, and that instability, it really permeates his professional judgment throughout the whole investigation.
It's like a perfect storm of personal and professional crisis.
It is a tragically realistic one. He was recently separated, and the divorce papers from his wife, Mona, had arrived just before Christmas. This deep, personal failure, this feeling of being abandoned, it filled him with what the source describes as shame and anger.
So he's not focused. He's not at his best.
Not even close. He was spending his evenings just sitting alone, staring at the walls, drinking cheap whiskey. It absolutely affected his professional focus. He was trying to manage a burgeoning national crisis while internally wrestling with these profound feelings of isolation.
And that isolation, it extends to his relationship with his daughter, Linda, doesn't it?
It does. She was 19 at the time and had previously attempted suicide when she was 15. So the source material paints this picture of intense, agonizing anxiety over her well-being.
And then she calls him right in the middle of all this.
Yeah, imagine. You're trying to organize the police response to the worst murder you've ever seen, and your daughter calls just to say she was at the train station, but changed her plans and was leaving immediately. She just cuts off contact again.
Wow.
Wallander described the feeling of holding that phone as if holding something dead, something hacked off. That level of emotional trauma doesn't just, disappear when he walks onto the crime scene a few hours later.
And it's not just his immediate family. There's also his father.
Yes, we also see this symbolic collapse of his foundations in the state of his father. His father was clearly declining, slipping into eccentricity and potentially some serious cognitive issues. Like living in squalor, for one. And then this very strange act of covering their historic, beautiful cobblestone courtyard with this ugly gray gravel. It's another sign of chaos just encroaching on something established and whole. His entire personal environment is dissolving.
And it's taking a physical toll on him as well.
Oh, definitely. He's put on 7 kilos. He's eating nothing but greasy takeaways and pizza since his separation. He even calls himself a flabby piece of shit at one point. This internal chaos is a perfect microcosm for the national chaos that's about to erupt. He feels isolated and vulnerable, just as his world is being invaded by this unprecedented brutality.
He is, frankly, emotionally compromised from the jump.
Completely. And the pressure on him is just immense. The entire investigation then hinges on one desperate moment of clarity.
This is with Maria Lövgren at the hospital.
Right. She survives just long enough to be transported there. Wallander's trusted old-school colleague, a detective named Rydberg, is sitting vigil at her bedside. She regains consciousness for only 10 minutes before she dies.
Just 10 minutes.
Just 10 minutes. And in those 600 seconds, she repeats one single haunting word over and over.
Foreign.
Foreign.
And this is where the plot really thickens and the ethical dilemma truly begins. So Wallander now has 2 pieces of evidence that suggest a non-local perpetrator. Maria's dying word and the physical evidence of the knot.
Let's focus on that knot. Rydberg, who is this very methodical detective and also a passionate amateur sailor, he immediately identifies the noose's unique structure. He knows knots.
And he'd never seen this one before.
He finds it highly irregular. He says he had never seen a knot like it, and crucially confirms it wasn't tied by someone who was a member of the Swedish Boy Scouts.
Which is a quiet way of saying it's not from around here.
Exactly. It's a specific confirmation that the person who tied that noose learned the skill somewhere else, outside the traditions of common Swedish ropesmanship. Rydberg even speculated it looked like a knot used in certain regions of Argentina, which is a detail that Wallander just latches onto, cementing this idea of a foreign origin.
So, okay, the police have 2 converging, unsettling clues, both pointing toward a foreign perpetrator. And this is 1990 Sweden, a time when immigration was on the rise and refugee centers were becoming, for some people, sources of real anxiety.
Wallander and Rydberg immediately recognized the existential danger of this information getting out.
Wallander is seized by this profound fear, not of the killer, but of the public reaction. He's afraid of what this clue will do to the innocent asylum seekers housed in camps nearby. He knows it could incite a wave of xenophobic violence.
So he asked Rydberg if they should try to keep it internal. He actually considers suppressing the most significant clue they have, all to protect innocent people.
And is that a failure of institutional ethics? I mean, to even consider suppressing evidence seems utterly antithetical to the mission of the police.
It's the ultimate ethical tightrope walk. And Rydberg, to his credit, struggles deeply with this. He acknowledges that keeping silent risks them being accused later of shielding foreign criminals. He knows the political climate is just. It's a tinderbox.
So they decide to hold a meeting at 8 a.m. to figure out a strategy.
Yes, but Wallander is driven by this profound doubt. He can't shake the feeling that this crime was driven by personal hate or revenge, yet now he has physical and verbal evidence pointing directly to refugees. They're trying to choose between police integrity and civic responsibility.
But the choice is stripped away from them entirely, isn't it?
In a shocking display of internal betrayal, the information is leaked almost immediately. You go straight to Swedish television.
So by that same evening, it's public news.
It's the lead story. Wallander is at home watching the local news in astonishment, and he hears the anchor saying that the Ystad police are now concentrating their search on as-yet unidentified foreign citizens, that it could not be ruled out that they might be refugees seeking asylum.
That just completely derails any chance of a quiet, methodical investigation.
Oh, completely. It immediately turns the Lunarp case into a political powder keg. The narrative is set. Foreigners committed this brutal act, and the police are immediately besieged by the media, by political actors, forcing Wallander out of the controlled environment of an investigation and onto the national stage.
That media lick, as we said, immediately creates this intense public pressure and anger. Wallander is just besieged by calls.
He is, and one of them stands out. It's from an anonymous man claiming to be one of the 10,000 redeemers who gives Wallander this chilling deadline. 72 hours.
72 hours to do what?
To stop shielding foreign criminals. Or, he says, something's going to burn. This immediately demonstrates the terrible real-world collateral damage of that internal leak.
So Wallander is desperate. He needs to find a strong, local, non-political lead to pull the investigation back from the brink of this threatened nationalistic violence.
And he gets exactly what he wants, a massive red herring that feels so real, so plausible, it consumes the next several weeks of his life.
And this comes from Maria Lövgren's brother, Lars Herden.
Right. Herden contacts the police and claims it's obvious that it was the money. And specifically, he calls it the German money. He presents this seemingly solid local motive that Wallander immediately embraces because it allows him to momentarily dismiss those really inconvenient foreign clues.
And this introduces a deeply hidden, uncomfortable family secret.
A very dark one. Herden reveals that the deceased, Johannes Lövgren, and his father had accumulated a secret fortune during the Second World War. And this wasn't standard farming profit. Herden calls it blood money.
What does he mean by that?
They had participated in the black market. They were secretly keeping livestock and buying up worn-out horses for a legal sale, profiting immensely during a time of national scarcity and rationing.
And Lövgren kept all this money hidden.
Completely secret. Even from his wife and his own daughters. He preserved it in various secret caches and accounts for decades.
So the financial timeline is quickly confirmed by Hansen, who's on the administrative side of the investigation.
Yes. After they get the warrants, they check the bank records. And sure enough, Lövgren had visited 2 banks the previous Thursday, just 3 days before he was murdered, and he withdrew a large confirmed sum of money.
The source material implies it was 27,000 Swedish kronor.
That's the figure. And to give you some context, in 1990, 27,000 kronor was a very respectable chunk of cash. It was certainly enough to be a serious motive for robbery, especially for someone who may have known about this long-rumored secret wealth.
So the narrative shifts entirely.
Completely. Wallander is invigorated. He thinks, okay, this is a crime of greed, not random political hatred. The focus shifts to finding someone local who knew about this money and had a claim, or at least a grievance, against Lövgren.
And Herden's testimony about the secret fortune, it also leads to another dark rumor.
The secret family.
Right. Wallander zeroes in on this, realizing a relative with a financial grievance and intimate knowledge of the family routine would be the perfect suspect. So the police identify 3 women who had sons by fathers listed as unknown during the right period, roughly 1947 to 1957.
And the primary focus immediately falls on a woman named Ellen Magnusson in the nearby town of Kristianstad.
Wallander throws his colleague Nesland in the car, and they head off, convinced they're about to crack this thing wide open with a classic domestic motive.
They find Ellen Magnusson living this deliberately small, undramatic life. She's a librarian, she's in a choral group. She's meticulously trying to erase any complications from her past.
And Wallander sees right through that.
He sees the calculated banality of her life, and that only strengthens his conviction that she's hiding a massive secret.
So this becomes Wallander's moment to showcase his psychological interrogation skills. It's a high-risk move, but it pays off, at least initially.
It does. He uses a tactical lie, which is something police often rely on when they're desperate. He just leans in and states, "Mrs. Magnusson, we know that Johannes Lövgren is the father of your son, Eric. There's no use denying it."
But he has zero proof at this point.
None whatsoever. But he plays on her greatest fear, exposing her lifetime of carefully constructed respectability.
And the lie works.
Terrifyingly well. She just breaks. She immediately confirms the decades-long relationship and Critically, she confirms that Lövgren was expected to bring her money very recently.
On the Thursday before the murder.
Exactly. The timing is perfect. She explained she planned to put it in a savings account for Eric, not give it to him directly, but the expectation of the money and the timing. It's exactly right for a robbery motive. Wallander is ecstatic. This is the solid local motive he has been craving.
So the focus immediately shifts to the son, Eric Magnusson. He's a civil servant in Malmö who operates a forklift.
Wallander questions him, noting the difference in appearance. Eric has fair hair, unlike the deceased Lövgren, but that doesn't really mean anything. Eric denies knowing Lövgren was his father, claiming his mother gave all these varying, contradictory stories about his parentage over the years.
But Wallander doesn't buy it.
Not for a second. He believes he's lying about his knowledge, and that makes Eric the prime suspect, either acting alone or with an accomplice, motivated by the sudden appearance of this blood money that he felt was his birthright.
And this secret son theory, fueled by Wallander's desperate need for a quick, contained Swedish solution, it's so compelling that it almost makes him ignore an important initial detail.
A detail that, ironically, pointed right back to the initial rejected foreigner lead.
Let's go back to the horse. Officer Noran, one of the first cops on the scene, he recalled this peculiar detail. He said, that someone must have given the horse some hay, maybe just an hour or so before we got there.
Right. And the neighbor, Nystrom, he hadn't fed her. And obviously, dead men don't feed horses. So this means the killer, or an accomplice, performed this mundane, caring chore immediately after committing a brutal double attack.
That specific detail implied familiarity, didn't it?
It did. It suggested the killer was someone intimate with the Lövgren's routine, someone who knew the horse needed feeding, or who knew Lövgren often went out to the stable late at night. And Wallander initially uses this detail to support the idea of an acquaintance or relative being the killer. It fits perfectly with his secret son theory.
The source material is very clear here. Wallander knew he should have checked this detail again. He had a friend, Sten Weiden, who was a horse expert, and he could have asked him if the feeding time could be pinned down more precisely. But he never does.
He never makes the call. He is so consumed by the urgency of the Magnusson lead, the need to arrest a local suspect before those national tensions boil over, that he just pushes the horse clue entirely to the back burner.
He calls it just a vague hunch.
Which demonstrates how the pressure of political fear can completely override good, methodical police work. You have to feel the frustration that this key detail, maybe the key to the entire timeline, just sits there ignored for months.
And that failure to follow through on the horse detail, it haunts him. Because while he's chasing the secret son all over Skåne, convinced he's found his man, that political clock is ticking down.
Ticking down to the 72-hour deadline set by the 10,000 redeemers.
So we have Wallander chasing the wrong man, Eric Magnusson, the secret son, who eventually provides a solid alibi while the external political situation is just deteriorating rapidly, exactly as he feared.
The anonymous caller's 72-hour window closes, and the promised violence arrives.
Wallander is trying to manage the Lunarv investigation, but he's forced to acknowledge the real physical threat to the refugee camps. He drives past the Hangholm refugee camp on the west side of town.
And this camp, it's just long rows of these vulnerable green-painted huts. He hears a crash, this dull, heavy boom, and he sees the threat coming to horrific fruition. One of the huts is, quote, completely engulfed in tall, raging flames.
And Wallander doesn't hesitate. He immediately calls in the fire department, giving his unique police identifier, and then, without waiting for backup, he just races across the road.
It's a moment of really rash bravery, probably driven by guilt over the leak. He smashes his fist through a window pane to grope for the latch, trying to get into the burning hut to search for victims.
And he gets seriously injured in the process.
He does. A large third-degree burn on one forearm cuts from the broken glass to his groin and his thigh, and a nasty lump above his eye. The fire department later confirms that the arson was deliberate and sophisticated. It was a handy little detonator that ignited some rags soaked in petrol. This was planned, targeted domestic terrorism.
And what's fascinating here, and deeply disturbing, is the institutional chaos that is immediately exposed by this. The camp director is dazed, and Wallander discovers the Immigration Service's records are in shocking disarray.
They can't reliably identify who is even registered in that hut. That makes it nearly impossible for the police to assess casualties or secure the area effectively.
And that administrative failure, it leads to a major confrontation.
It does. The head of the Immigration Service later calls Wallander politely, but very coldly, to express profound displeasure. And the accusation is clear. The police are not prioritizing the safety of the asylum seekers. He even suggests that there might be an element of racism behind the lack of interest shown by the Stad police force.
So Wallander's just caught in this crossfire.
Completely. Internally, he's desperate to solve the Linnarp case. Externally, he's being accused of being complicit in the rising tide of racist violence that the initial media leak from his own department directly sparked.
But the violence escalates beyond arson. Within 24 hours of that fire, the political threat turns lethal.
Yes. A Somali refugee, a father of 9, is found shot execution style near the camp. This is cold, calculated murder, clearly linked to the nationalist threat that was spurred on by the media panic.
So Wallander now has 2 major, entirely separate but intertwined murder investigations running at the same time.
Exactly. The Linnarp case is about who killed an old farmer for his blood money. The Häggholm case is about who executed an innocent refugee for political ideology. And the latter case, because it's fueled by this white-hot rage, it moves incredibly rapidly, unlike the months of stagnation in the Linnarp investigation.
The breakthrough comes from a surprisingly meticulous eyewitness.
An Iranian woman. She provides a description of a man she saw nearby that is almost forensic in its detail. She said he was wearing blue overalls, of normal height but taller than Wallander, around 45, with light or blonde, clearly Swedish-colored hair, and a discernible bald patch on his head.
And she remembers these 2 crucial details.
2 perfect, humanizing details. She remembers him having big hands, and that he was seen eating an apple nearby. She also witnessed him driving off in his Citroen.
That description immediately gives Wallander a tangible lead. He focuses the investigation on finding the owner of any stolen or suspicious Citroen in the area.
The car is quickly traced to a man named Rune Bergman, a retired policeman living in Malmö. And Wallander develops this strong, immediate hunch about Bergman, despite his colleagues' skepticism.
And this is where Wallander's famous intuition battles with police logic. Hansen, his colleague, strongly objects to pursuing a retired officer. He argues that no policeman would be dim enough to pretend his car had been stolen if he were planning to commit a murder.
But Wallander trusts his gut. He ignores the bureaucracy and proceeds with this discreet, grueling surveillance on Bergman.
The scene shifts to Malmö, and Wallander takes the night shift himself. He drives there, finds Bergman's house dark, and just settles in for hours of freezing cold pacing.
And you can feel his exhaustion. He's tired, he's injured from the fire, emotionally shattered, and he's constantly humming Strauss waltzes just to keep warm. This physical discomfort just underscores his singular focus, and eventually it pays off. He catches sight of Bergman slipping out the back door and getting into a taxi.
Which leads Wallander on a desperate high-speed pursuit toward the city of Lund.
Right, and this is the critical moment where Wallander's physical frailty almost costs him everything. He tracks Bergman to a building in Lund that's covered in scaffolding and protective sacking.
And instead of waiting for backup, he starts to climb.
He does. He attempts this painful overnight surveillance by climbing the precarious scaffolding in the freezing cold. His recently sustained forehead wound reopens and starts bleeding into his eyes, obscuring his vision. It's just sheer desperation.
But he pushes through the pain and the cold and finally gets eyes on Bergman.
He does. And Bergman is talking to a man in a dressing gown. A man who fits the apple eater description perfectly. This man is Valfrid Strom. And Strom, like Bergman, was active in extremist nationalist groups.
Which confirms the direct link between the execution and the racist ideology that had been allowed to fester after the media leak.
Exactly. But the surveillance ends catastrophically. Wallander, exhausted and impaired, loses his footing. He takes a dangerous fall, painfully wedging his leg between 2 planks of the scaffolding. For a terrifying moment, he's just hanging there, upside down.
He barely manages to pull himself free, but he has the confirmation he needs.
He does. He immediately coordinates a high-risk, immediate arrest operation with his team and the new, very formidable prosecutor, Annette Brolin.
And what follows is just dramatic, dangerous police work.
It is. Wallander and his team burst into Strom's flat in Lund. Strom is incredibly fast. He elbows a police officer and flings himself out into the street. Wallander, hampered by his bleeding face and a jammed safety catch on his revolver, runs after him.
And Strom tries to carjack someone.
He forces a nearby driver out of their vehicle and steals it. In a moment of pure improvisation, Wallander manages to commandeer a nearby horse box. Ironically, a vehicle designed to transport the very animal that holds the ignored clue in his other case.
The police chase ends when Wallander, desperate to stop Strom, manages to shoot and kill him.
Strom is dead, and Bergman, the retired policeman, is detained. The forensic linkage is established quickly. They find the matching brand of cigarettes in the mud near the murder scene, confirming Bergman was there.
So the Hakeholm case is solved in 48 brutal hours.
Yes, and the core realization hits Wallander immediately. The public frenzy over the Lunarp leak directly resulted in the execution of an innocent refugee by two angry Swedes, motivated by the information that his own police force had betrayed.
The political murder is solved, but the Linart murder, the crime that started it all, remains frustratingly cold for months. Eric Magnusson, the secret son, he had a solid, verifiable alibi.
Which proved that Wallander's huge investment of time in the secret family theory was a complete professional misstep. And Wallander's just driven by this fear that he missed something essential that the police had completely run aground.
But the eventual breakthrough is a triumph of methodical persistence. It confirms the original foreign clue that Wallander had so desperately tried to dismiss.
And it comes from Martin Lawson, who was often overlooked in the investigation. He finally tracks down the chimney sweep, a man named London, who had been a really unreliable early witness.
London now confirms that he drove Lövgren home that Thursday morning, the day he withdrew the 27,000 kroner. And critically, London says he dropped Lövgren on the dirt road leading to the stable, which is why the neighboring Nystroms hadn't seen him arrive home.
This explained the missing 3 or 4 hours in Lövgren's day that had previously baffled the investigation. And London also remembered Lövgren carrying a specific brown briefcase, which, of course, was missing from the scene.
And this detail of the briefcase, proving the crime was a robbery, it galvanizes Wallander. He realizes the key must lie in how the robbers knew Lövgren had the money, and more importantly, where he lived.
This is where Wallander's methodical insistence on detail, a trait often overshadowed by his more dramatic hunches, finally pays off. He brings in the bank clerk, Brittelina Boden, who processed Lövgren's withdrawal 6 months prior.
Wallander knows she has an exceptional memory, and he pushes her to reconstruct the entire transaction minute by minute. This becomes the most important tactical choice he makes, forcing a seemingly irrelevant civilian memory to provide the final link.
And the crux of the entire Lunarp case is finally uncovered. Boden remembers Lövgren filling out the withdrawal slip for 27,000 kroner, and she recalls a specific, unnecessary detail.
What?
Lövgren, being an old man used to older banking methods, had unnecessarily written down his home address on the withdrawal slip. He signed it and left. And critically, she remembers that immediately after Lövgren left the counter, 2 young foreign men entered the bank. Their names were later found to be Lucia and Lothar Kraftik.
And the detail here is exquisite. One of the young men bent down, claiming he dropped a glove.
In that one moment, he likely snatched the discarded withdrawal slip from the counter or from the bin next to it, a slip that contained not only Lövgren's name, but his precise, isolated farm address in Lunarp.
So these 2 men were asylum seekers?
Yes, who had been housed nearby at an old vicarage that was being used as a temporary camp outside a place called Skurup. This confirms the initial foreign lead that started everything. They were opportunistic. They used a rented or stolen car to follow Lövgren back to his isolated farm, turning a simple opportunistic theft into a brutal double murder based on a chance piece of discarded paper.
The suspects are identified, but they're long gone from the camp. After running their photographs through Interpol and the Immigration Service photo archives, months pass with absolutely no result.
Then Brittelina Boden, the same diligent bank clerk, sees the 2 men at the bustling annual Kivik market months later in August. She calls the police, and the chaotic finale begins.
And the capture is far from easy.
Not at all. Wallander and Martinson attempt the arrest near a stall that's covered in racks of leather jackets. Lucia immediately pulls a revolver, firing a shot that narrowly misses them, hitting a nearby caravan.
Martinson dives, gets tangled in guy ropes, but manages to fire his own weapon, wounding Lucia.
Chaos just reigns. Wallander, running with mud smeared on his face from the chase, manages to wrestle the gun away, while Martinson captures the wounded man in this jumble of leather jackets. The second man, Lothar Kraftik, tries to flee.
He leads Wallander on a reckless chase over a cliff edge, where Wallander finally captures him. The sheer exhaustion and physical toll of this job, 8 months after it all began, are just so apparent in Wallander's final collapse onto the suspect.
And during the interrogation of Lothar Kraftik, the very first vague hunch from the beginning of the case, the horse clue, is finally confirmed and solved.
Wallander asks him, "Why did you feed the horse?"
And Kraftik confirms it. They fed the horse. He explains that they had been living near the farm at the Skurup vicarage. They knew the Lövgren's routine, and they knew that Lövgren habitually went to the stable late at night. That made him the most vulnerable member of the household.
And this completes the tragic irony of the whole affair, as Wallander's colleague Rydberg later reflects.
It does. The Lunarp murder was committed by foreigners, two opportunistic robbers who were handed their target on a scrap of paper, but the immediate racist public backlash from the media leak resulted in the execution of an innocent Somali refugee by angry xenophobic Swedes Bergman and Strom.
Despite all the facts being laid out and both cases being successfully closed, Wallander is still not happy. He can't explain the level of brutality, especially the news.
He can't. The source material states that even after the detention hearing, Wallander was profoundly unsatisfied. Why the noose around Maria Lövgren's neck? Why such extreme overkill? Those questions remain fundamentally unanswered. The killers confessed to robbery, not political hate, yet the method suggested the latter.
And Wallander realized he was grappling with something entirely new. The violence wasn't necessary for the robbery, yet it was employed. It was random, brutal, and it was devoid of the kind of logic he was used to in old-fashioned Swedish crime.
He recognized that the very nature of violence in Sweden had changed, irreversibly, and it marked a terrifying new reality for law enforcement.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, Wallander's grueling investigation, spanning from January to August 1990, showed that violence in Sweden was definitively changing.
Yes, driven not just by local hatred, but by global tensions and opportunistic crime. And it was all exacerbated by poor security protocols at refugee facilities and aggressive media manipulation that just fueled this intense political anxiety.
The source material gives us a brief, almost hopeful summary of Wallander's life 6 months after the arrest. It reflects a sense of resolution, even if it's not peace. Bergman is sentenced to a long prison term.
And Wallander, utterly exhausted from the case, finally takes a holiday. He drives to North Cape with his daughter Linda. And Linda is now stable, and with her Kenyan medical student boyfriend, Herman Mboya.
He also continues his complicated, evolving relationship with prosecutor Annette Brolin, who eventually accepts a weekend trip to Copenhagen with him. So life, at least externally, is stabilizing for him.
But internally, Wallander knows the world has shifted. He concludes that the unexplained brutality in the Lennart case and the overt political motivation in the Häggholm case mark a new, frightening reality for his country. He understands that the lines between opportunism, personal rage, and political terror have completely blurred.
And here's the final provocative thought here I've set, the conclusion that really ties his own personal anxieties to this huge societal shift. After all the chaos, the pursuit, the political maneuvering, and the ultimate solving of both murders, Wallander thinks, we're living in the age of the noose. Fear will be on the rise.
And this raises an important question for you, the listener. In a world of increasing information chaos, where a bank slip can lead to a double murder and a media leak can lead to a political execution, what is the ultimate price paid when the fear of the unknown becomes the primary motivator for violence, both among citizens and within the very institutions sworn to uphold the law?
And that, for now, is where we leave Inspector Wallander and the quiet, complex chaos of Gestad.